We entrepreneurs tend to think we never get anything done, and we have energy just draining out of our brains at all times, and we wonder why we feel like we can't keep up. Welcome to the Soul Sourced Podcast, unconventional business advice for the highly creative, secretly sensitive, and wildly ambitious entrepreneur. I'm your host, Christine Kane. Let's do this. Good morning. This is Christine. We are on episode number 34. It is 6 a.m. my time right now while I'm recording this. I am she who rises early. It's just turned out to be that way. I love it. I love getting up early. I love recording these when it's dark out and no one's around, and I can kind of just enter the energy of these podcasts and talk to you from that place. And speaking of energy, today's episode, we're going to talk about something that I call the energy of completion. So one time, and this was a while ago, but I was talking to a new business owner who told me she had a problem with procrastination. And she confessed to me how she found it much easier to go downstairs to her kitchen and clean the oven than she did to sit and write the copy for her new website. And the thing is, and I don't know, I may be the only coach who thinks this way. I don't see this as a procrastination problem. I see it as a dopamine problem. I see it as a need to train your brain to understand that you are now an entrepreneur and that you seriously need to figure out how you're going to regularly let yourself experience this energy that I am simply calling the energy of completion. Because when you clean the oven, for instance, you get to finish that and say, I'm done. But not so much when you're writing website copy or any of the other many things that we entrepreneurs do. So her story made me think of a time when I was on my way out of town to drive to Atlanta for one of our biannual events. Then this was back when we used to do all of our up-level events in Atlanta, because that's what I was told to do by well-meaning strategists who said that no one would want to fly to Asheville, which turned out to be completely false. But anyway, typically pre-event time is a bit intense for me as I'm getting all ready. And I was at Up Level World headquarters in downtown Asheville. I was grabbing some of the things that I needed before I left town. And I bumped into the woman who does most of the cleaning for that building, for our building. And she has her own business and is obviously quite successful at it. And I had this fleeting moment where I was consumed by envy of her business. I remember texting my client, Sue Ludwig, that I was currently deciding to be envious of this other woman because cleaning things seemed like such a rewarding experience. And we had this very funny back and forth text conversation about how great it must be to have a job where when you're done, you know that you're done. You know, the stovetop was dirty, but now it's clean and sparkly, and the floors were gross, but now they're all shiny. And you can close the door and feel a sense of total completion. So what I was experiencing at that moment, even though I was just being funny, it wasn't envy at that woman. I was experiencing what we'll call dopamine envy. I was craving the energy of completion. And if you're listening to this podcast, most likely you know what I mean. You write a blog, and sure, you're done, but it could be better. Or you publish a book, and that was great, but you totally could have edited it more. You did a Facebook Live last week, and that was great, but you got a few questions, and now you need to schedule another one to address those confused people. And you have a meeting with someone on your team who has an issue with someone else on your team, and an inbox with emails to answer, not to mention that if you're a new business owner, there are so many unfinished items that you know you could be doing or should be doing, but there's not enough brain power or even enough you to ever get a sense of being done. So in other words, what happens is that you're never allowing your brain to experience the energy of completion. The workload of the entrepreneur always makes me think of the line in the song Life in the Fast Lane by the Eagles. It's that line that Don Henley sings so well. Everything, all the time. And that's what our brains feel like. It's just this wild, ongoing, everything, all the time mode. And you might laugh at that, or you might tell yourself, you know, a total sad and isolated, poor me kind of story. But the gift of entrepreneurship is that you can take the responsibility to experience and almost demand that you let yourself experience the energy of completion, but you have to be committed to how important that energy is. In fact, this episode is kind of a continued coaching segment from an interaction I had 2 weeks ago on a Q&A call for my members of Uplevel Cafe. And by the way, we're getting ready to reopen Uplevel Cafe. We haven't opened up to new members in well over a year at this point, and many of you have been asking about it, and we are going to do that. But there was a new business owner on the Q&A. I will call her Jenny. And Jenny was beating herself up because getting started this year has been so hard. And I think a lot of people are experiencing this, getting up off the mat after last year. And we've all had so many new plans and dreams of letting it all go and starting all afresh. And Jenny told me she had been fired up when she began the year, and she has a new business. And of course, with a new business, there are many things to do and many things you should do. And Jenny had started the year by setting intentions, but then January became a whirlwind of distraction. And so when February began, she tried to do an intention reset like I emailed you guys about, but she was having a hard time getting any kind of feeling of momentum. And like I said, she's trying to get her business started. So here's the thing. When someone can't get momentum and is hoping that their intention alone will make things just magically shift inside of them and it's not working, that's often my cue as a coach that we need to edge in there with a little bit of dopamine. And that might mean that they're lost in the many unclear to-dos, like these sort of nebulous things we say to ourselves, like, I got to get clients, or I need a website, or I'm not even sure how to describe what I do, or I should call that person back who asked about my services. And then there's that training out there. Plus, oh my God, I have to be more present, and presence. Yes, presence and mindfulness as well. And then there's that yoga subscription I got. I haven't done that. And I have to be more focused. I'm not focused enough. And folks, I think that this endless shoulding and ruminating is a symptom that it's really time to step back into some basics. And in this case, the basic thing that you need, and it's also what I said to Jenny, is that you need to experience the energy of completion. You need to step away from everything all the time into pick one thing and get it the fuck done. Okay, so what is this thing I'm calling completion? I think it's important we define that. So completion is the energy of intentionally being done and intentionally moving on. It's telling your brain, hey, we aren't thinking about this anymore, at least not consciously. It's giving yourself a chance to be present to your life so that you're not living in what Tony Schwartz so aptly calls the gray zone in his book, The Way We're Working Isn't Working. So we're in the gray zone when we don't let ourselves ever be present to what we're doing because we have so many unfinished things ruminating in our brains. Like we keep on working in our heads even when we're having dinner with our partner or when we're out on a hike with our dog. Also, the energy of completion is that satisfying check mark that you put on that item on your to-do list. It's how dopamine gets created. And while it's not the only thing our brains need as entrepreneurs, it's one thing to keeping us out of the gray zone and enjoying the moment or even enjoying our lives. And finally, in my experience, the energy of completion is the foundation of trusting yourself, because nothing diminishes trust more than telling yourself you'll do something and then not doing it, and then telling yourself you'll do it and then not doing it. And we all know that track we get on. And if we're taking on this big, beautiful, life-changing opportunity of learning how to trust yourself, then it means we're going to start out small. So for some of you, this means that you're going to need to set the bar very low. Jenny, for instance, was hurting herself because she kept setting that bar too high with all these big, huge intentions and intention resets. And while it's lovely and noble to have great expectations, they do you zero good if you continually whittle away at your stores of self-trust. So I'm going to give you 2 simple words that will be your touchstones for how to experience the energy of completion. And our little secret here is that these are ultimately showing you how to trust yourself when you say you're going to do something. The first word is define, and the second word is celebrate. And of course, we're going to start with the first word, and that is define. And the problem many of us have is that we set intentions and we leave it at that. So all the changes in our business that we need to make remain these nebulous, floaty ideas rolling around in our heads. So our energy just kind of dangles and drifts, and we never experience any sense of accomplishment. So I don't know if any of you remember this, but there's an old New Yorker cartoon by Alex Gregory, and I love his stuff. It was from way back in 2005. And the cartoon is divided into 3 frames, and it features the same man in all 3 of them. And in the first frame, this guy's working at his computer, and there's this thought bubble above his head showing that he's dreaming about golfing. And then in the second frame, he's golfing, and the thought bubble above his head, he's dreaming about sex. And in the third frame, he's having sex, and in the thought bubble above his head, he's thinking about work. And of course, this is funny because so few of us are truly present in any activity we do. But sometimes I think there's something deeper going on that we can actually work with. And this is the coach in me. So I want to dig in a bit more, always. But part of the problem, I think, is how we even set up our activities and the things we do. And this is why the word define is so key. When you're the owner of a business, you become the CEO of YOU. And what this means is that you need to be the one who defines what completion even is. And you do that in advance. Because most of us, we don't have little tasks like clean the oven. We have big, ginormous things like make the website or write the book or figure out a launch strategy. So what you're going to do is you're going to define 3 things. First is that you have to define what it is specifically that you will get done on this particular project this coming week. So you're not going to say the usual thing that you say, like, I have to write these warm letters, or I got to write my book. You are going to instead define the specific task that has to happen now. Like, I am going to work on the story of my client, Sylvia, in that section of chapter 3 in my book. Or I'm going to write the shitty first draft of my very first warn letter. Or I'm going to figure out the angle of my launch and come up with a name for the webinar. You absolutely must train yourself to define the specific thing that must get completed. The second thing you need to define in advance is when exactly you will do this thing. And that means it has to be an exact time on an exact day. And the best way to do that is to look at your calendar for the week and then put that thing in the calendar at that time. And then the third thing you must define is the exact duration of how long you're going to do that thing that you defined. And this is where it gets tricky, and this is where we're going to set the bar low. So I suggest that if this is a big thing or a new thing, that you define completion by setting the bar very low for your duration at first. And I'm talking like 20 or 30 minutes. And I'm going to tell you how I trained my brain to do this way back when I was a songwriter. So you would think that if someone loves songwriting so much that they make it their profession, that they would just write songs all the time in every spare moment. But when songwriting becomes your profession, your business, you're also running said business, and you're getting dates on your calendar, and you're going on tour, and you're managing your finances and your taxes, and you're sending out mailings, and you're talking to promoters. And songwriting itself can often take a back seat. And you'll notice that it takes a back seat because all these other activities are a different sort of brain energy than sitting down and writing a song. So every time I came off the road, I always had a million things to deal with at home, like laundry and mail and all the stuff you come home to after you travel. And plus, I came off the road, and as one of my friends said to me once, "Christine, you look like you've been rode hard and hung up wet." And so when you look and feel like you've been rode hard and hung up wet, as my Southern friends like to say, the last thing you're going to want to do is sit down and write songs. So I would start with 30-minute blocks each day. When I got off the road, I would sit with my guitar, and my only goal was to show up for 30 minutes. And that was how I would let myself experience the energy of completion and start to trust myself to be a writer again. And it usually, it took no more than 4 or 5 days for me to get a sense of ritual with that, and then want to show up for that again. And I began to use that principle with everything on my list that was sort of a bigger project that had more nebulous feelings about it to me. So first, it had to be on my list of priorities. That was a definition. Then I had to set kind of a baseline for how I would show up, which was always a time span each day and for how many days, and then I would go do it. Now, I don't want to assume that you and I have the same writing style, so just know that this is an example that I used, and because I have that writing style. You can go listen to episode number 18, I think, which is called On Writing Your First Book, where I talk about how my writing style and how I write is different from other writers, and you may find solace in that episode, or at least some insights into the writing process if that's what you're interested in. But ultimately, this method that I just walked through, and I kid you not, this is how I created a successful career in the arts as a songwriter and a record label. And then when I went on to create a coaching company, it was just boring, routine, showing up, defining what done looks like. And the key thing to remember is that you have to start with that word define, because you are the one who defines what completion looks like. And this is really tricky to understand. We're all lost in this place where we are waiting for some outside thing or person to give us that permission to say we're done. And again, if you want to know more about this idea of waiting, I would refer you to episode 25 of this podcast, which is called Procrastination and the 8 Waits. But anyway, this whole thing of waiting for this outside thing to give us our dopamine hit no longer works when you have your own business. You define. You take responsibility. You set your week up with an eye on learning how to trust yourself as the leader, as the owner. That's a major paradigm shift for many of us, and it starts with that definition. So I'm going to add a little trick here that I did whenever and still do, whenever I do these blocks of time. And it's a trick that's been a game changer for so many of my clients, and it's simple and it sounds stupid, but oh my God, it works. And that is that when you sit down to do these to-dos, these tasks that you set up for yourself at that time, you set a timer. And in this case, it is so easy to do now. We have our phones that have timers in them. We have computers that have timers on them. Set a timer for that time. And the reason that works is that it basically tells your lizard brain or your monkey mind, whatever you want to call it, that, hey, this is what we're doing now. You're actually, again, it's training. You are training your brain. This is what I'm doing now. And one more little trick that I do when I set the timer is that I have a set of headphones right here by my desk, and I throw those on. And I have an app that has different kinds of noise, pink noise, white noise, brown noise, and I set it to brown noise with binaural beats. And I work with that on so I'm not hearing background noises. It's harder to distract me. And again, it's that feeling of training yourself to say, this is what I'm doing now, and I'm not doing anything else. And one more thing that I would add to this is an idea that Cal Newport has, and he shares in his book, Deep Work. So Cal describes this end of day ritual where when he's done his work for the day, he says what he calls his magic phrase, which is schedule, shutdown, complete. And yes, he says this out loud, which is totally geeky, but I love this. It tells the brain, hey brain, we're done. And there is so much about define there. There's so much definition there because he is the one who has defined, I'm done. And to make it real, he says it out loud. And those of you who have been my clients know that I'm very keen on using our voice as a tool in many of our business scenarios. So take that idea and run with it. And this brings me to our second word now, which is celebrate. So at Up Level, our mastermind retreats, even the virtual retreats that we're doing now, they always begin with a tool called the Focus 360 tool. And the reason I designed this and the reason I do this is because I'm creating the energy of completion even before we get started with our retreat. I'm creating definition for my clients. And like I said, we entrepreneurs tend to think we never get anything done, and we have energy just draining out of our brains at all times, and we wonder why we feel like we can't keep up. So the first segment of the Focus 360 tool, which we do every quarter, like I said, as we open up our retreats, it's a celebration of sorts. You know, not only does each entrepreneur write down a list of big and small things they've accomplished, but they also write down why it's so great. There's an actual column. It says why this is so great. In other words, I am training them to celebrate the bars they have crossed instead of this endless parade of verbal debris that proves why they should be more like someone else or didn't do quite enough. We're actually pulling that bar down and we're saying, I did this and here's why it's so great. And I will tell you that I have fought my way to keeping this tool going in our masterminds. Because when I first started it, I remember a call with one client who just was pissed off, and she bitched me out for including this tool because she thought that as a coach, when we did our retreats, my job was just to hit the ground running on day one and start teaching her new tactics for making more money. And that all of this sort of Focus 360 stuff was useless. And of course, not so surprisingly, this person never actually got her business off the ground. And that's because all the tactics in the world do you no good if you aren't training your brain how to run your business. And that includes some kind of ritual of acknowledgement, which means that you celebrate what you've done each week. You can do this by doing the Sunday Summit, which if you got my book, The Soul Sourced Entrepreneur, you got that tool for free. And I even gave it as a free download with all the tools that came with the book. But it's also why we do accountability buddies here at Up Level, because we want our clients not only to learn how to make money, but also to train their brains how to manage their own energy as business owners. And celebration is the key to the energy of completion. You begin to trust yourself. It builds the stores of trust so that you can start to create momentum. But again, you have to be the one to step back and acknowledge yourself. So write it down, call a friend, tell someone, use your voice to say, I'm going to celebrate that I spent 20 minutes every day this past week on my warm letter, and now I have a first draft. Yay me. So those victories get bigger and bigger the longer you do this practice. But it really does go a long way to the energy of completion that so many of us are missing in our work. Oh my God, this time went by so fast. I was going to read you a tiny little section of my book to finish the thought about completion. But we don't have time. I want to honor your time. I'm going to leave you with this. What you have to start to do is recognize how important this energy of completion is. You know, everyone is talking about morning rituals and winning the day and all of that kind of stuff. And completion is something that I believe gets ignored to our detriment. So make this key and really start to be aware when you actually experience it. And you do that with 2 words: define, and celebrate. And you guys, thank you so much for listening, and I will see you on our next episode.
I've had a number of nights just staring at the windows and walls. Long sighs and lonely replies and imaginary telephone calls. Seems to be the